Kosher and unkosher animals. Wisdom in God's design. A common objection raised against the continuing relevance or meaning of the kosher laws is the phrase, often rendered in English, as thus he declared all foods clean. This line is frequently cited as proof that Yeshua, Jesus, abolished the dietary distinctions of the Torah. However, a closer examination of the text, its language, and its context reveals that this conclusion rests more on interpretive tradition than on what was actually spoken or intended. First, it is critical to note that the phrase, "Thus he declared all foods clean," does not appear in the spoken words of Jesus. In the Greek manuscripts of Mark 7 verse 19, the phrase is often included in parentheses or as a translator's clarification rather than a direct quotation. The original Greek structure allows for more than one rendering, and the statement itself functions as an editorial aside, not a command issued by Yeshua. In other words, Jesus never audibly said, "I now make all foods clean." That idea is inferred, added interpretively, by later translators attempting to explain the passage. More importantly, the context of Mark 7 is not about kosher laws at all, but about ritual hand-washing, a Pharisee tradition, not a Torah command. The debate centers on how food is eaten, not what food is eaten. Yeshua's point is that impurity does not originate from unwashed hands or external contact, but from the heart, through pride, malice, violence, lust, and deceit. He contrasts human tradition with divine intent, not Torah with freedom. Had Yeshua intended to overturn dietary laws explicitly given by God in the Torah, such a declaration would have been earth-shattering within first-century Judaism, and it would have sparked immediate outrage among his disciples. Yet we see no such reaction. On the contrary, Yeshua himself consistently lived as a Torah-observant Jew, participated in temple life, and affirmed that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. The silence of the disciples on this issue is telling. They did not understand him to be abolishing kosher laws. This brings us to Peter's vision in Acts 10, which is often cited as further evidence that food laws were revoked. In this vision, Peter sees a sheet lowered from heaven containing animals both clean and unclean, and he is commanded to eat. Peter's immediate response is revealing, "I have never eaten anything common or unclean." This occurs years after the resurrection, demonstrating that Peter, who walked with Yeshua daily, did not believe that Jesus had already declared all foods clean. The interpretation of the vision is not left to speculation. Peter himself explains it explicitly. "God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean." The vision was not about food. It was about people, specifically the inclusion of Gentiles into the covenant community without requiring them to become ethnically Jewish first. The animals in the vision function as symbolic imagery, a visual language to communicate a relational truth, the removal of a barrier between Jews and Gentiles. To reinterpret Peter's vision as a dietary ruling is to override Peter's own explanation. The issue at stake was not lunch. It was fellowship, unity, and the expansion of God's redemptive plan to the nations. In both cases, Mark 7 and Acts 10, the text itself resists the idea that kosher laws were simply canceled. Instead, these passages address misplaced definitions of defilement and misunderstood boundaries between people, not the abandonment of God's established order. The Torah's dietary distinctions were never about ethnic superiority or legalism. They were about holiness, discipline, and identity. Yeshua and the apostles did not erase these themes. They deepened them, redirecting the focus from outward ritual alone to inward faithfulness, while never dismissing the wisdom embedded in God's design. Thus, the claim that Jesus made all food clean relies heavily on parenthetical interpretation, not direct command, and often ignores the broader biblical narrative. When read carefully, the scriptures present continuity rather than contradiction, a movement from external markers of separation toward a heart-level holiness that includes the nations, without declaring God's earlier instructions void or mistaken. In this light, kosher laws remain what they always were, not a burden, but a signpost, pointing toward order in creation, discipline in daily life, and a God who cares deeply about what enters both the body and the soul. Kosher animals and why they are kosher. Biblical requirement. Land animals are considered kosher only if they both chew the cud and have completely split hooves. Leviticus 11 verse 3, Deuteronomy 14 verse 6. Together, these traits reflect a slow, deliberate digestive process and stable grazing behavior, indicating animals that feed on vegetation rather than decay and that occupy a clean, ordered place within the food chain. Cattle are kosher because they chew the cud and possess fully split hooves, marking them as ruminants with a multi-chambered stomach that gradually breaks down plant matter and filters toxins. Their grazing behavior avoids carrion and waste, and when handled properly, their meat is less prone to carrying harmful pathogens, making them both ritually and practically clean. Sheep qualify as kosher because they chew the cud and have split hooves, sustaining themselves on grasses and herbs rather than scavenge material. Their consistent diet and digestive efficiency reduce parasite risk, and their fat and muscle composition have made them a reliable and healthy food source throughout biblical history. Goats are kosher due to their ruminant digestion and split hooves, combined with their highly selective feeding habits. Unlike scavengers, goats avoid decaying matter, and their ability to process tough vegetation has made their meat and milk staples of healthy diets for thousands of years across the ancient Near East. Deer are considered kosher because they chew the cud and have split hooves, even though they live in the wild. They feed exclusively on natural vegetation, do not scavenge, and were commonly hunted and eaten in biblical times, demonstrating that wild status does not equal uncleanness when dietary patterns remain ordered. Exotic or less common kosher land animals. Antelope chew the cud and have split hooves, feeding on grasses and shrubs in open terrain. Scripture explicitly names certain antelope species as clean, Deuteronomy 14 verse 5, confirming their place among kosher animals despite their modern perception as exotic. Gazelles are kosher ruminants with split hooves that graze on vegetation and avoid carrion. They are repeatedly mentioned in Scripture as acceptable food and were valued for their lean meat in ancient Israel. The ibex, a wild mountain goat with impressive curved horns, chews the cud and has split hooves. Though rarely eaten today, it fits the kosher requirements and was part of the biblical landscape, illustrating that wild and domestic animals alike were evaluated by the same standards. Elk and moose, though unfamiliar to the ancient Near East, are ruminants with split hooves that feed on vegetation rather than scavenge material. Their biology places them squarely within the kosher category, demonstrating that the Torah's standards transcend geography and time. Biological order, not preference. The Torah defines clean and unclean animals not by appearance or culture, but by biological function and ecological order. Kosher land animals share two defining traits: chewing the cud and fully split hooves. Chewing the cud reflects a ruminant digestive system in which food is eaten, partially digested, regurgitated, and chewed again, allowing tough plant fibers to be broken down slowly and thoroughly. This multi-stage process reduces toxins, limits harmful bacteria, and produces a cleaner, more stable meat, especially important in the ancient world. Just as important is what these animals do not eat. Kosher animals are grazers, not scavengers. They avoid carrion, the flesh of dead or decaying animals, which harbors parasites, blood-borne pathogens, and dangerous bacteria. Animals that consume carrion act as environmental cleanup agents, not as healthy food sources, and their tissues often accumulate the byproducts of decay. Together, rumination and split hooves identify animals that feed on life rather than death, digest slowly rather than rapidly, and exist within clear ecological boundaries. Kosher laws therefore reflect biological wisdom expressed through covenantal instruction, teaching discernment, restraint, and alignment with order in creation. Non-kosher land animals: disorder, scavenging, and biological risk. Non-kosher land animals fail to meet the Torah's defining requirements. They do not both chew the cud and have fully split hooves. This absence is not incidental. These animals tend to be scavengers, omnivores, predators, or biologically inefficient digesters, meaning they consume decay, flesh, waste, or blood and process food rapidly rather than thoroughly. As a result, they are more likely to carry parasites, pathogens, and toxins, particularly dangerous in the ancient world. The Torah does not label these animals evil, but unsuitable. Their role in creation often centers on cleanup, predation, or survival through consumption of anything available, rather than stable, life-sustaining nourishment. Camels chew the cud, but do not have fully split hooves, disqualifying them from being kosher. Leviticus 11 verse 4. Biologically, camels possess a unique digestive system that differs from true ruminants, and they are known to consume a wide variety of plant material, including thorny, bitter, and potentially toxic vegetation. Biblically, camels are repeatedly associated with uncleanness, and in ancient tradition they were linked with skin diseases and ceremonial impurity. While Scripture does not describe camels as causing disease in modern medical terms, their classification as unclean reflects both symbolic disorder and practical risk in a pre-modern environment. Even today, camels are known carriers of zoonotic diseases, reinforcing the wisdom of their exclusion. The pig is perhaps the most well-known non-kosher animal, and Scripture uses it repeatedly as a symbol of impurity and rebellion against God's design. Although it has split hooves, it does not chew the cud, making it a clear example of partial conformity, appearing clean on the outside while remaining unclean on the inside. Leviticus 11 verse 7, Deuteronomy 14 verse 8. In biblical thought, this incomplete conformity represents disorder and imbalance, something that looks acceptable but violates God's established boundaries. Biologically, pigs are opportunistic omnivores. They will eat carrion, refuse, insects, human waste, their own feces, and even their own dead when available. Unlike ruminant animals, pigs possess a single-chambered stomach and a rapid digestive process. This means toxins, pathogens, and parasites are not filtered or broken down as thoroughly before being stored in fat and muscle tissue. Even when marketed as farm-raised or range-fed, this digestive nature does not change. Pigs also lack functional sweat glands. Because they cannot sweat, their bodies retain waste products that would otherwise be expelled through perspiration. This contributes to toxin accumulation within their flesh. Historically, and even into the modern era, pork has been associated with a high parasite load. Medical and agricultural literature has often noted that pigs can carry dozens of parasites and pathogens, including roundworms, tapeworms, and other parasitic infections. Traditional sources frequently cite that pigs can harbor upward of 20 or more different parasites, especially in pre-modern sanitation conditions. This reality would have been devastating in the ancient world, long before modern cooking standards or medical treatment. Scripture speaks forcefully about God's view of the pig. The Torah states plainly, "And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, yet does not chew the cud, is unclean for you. You shall not eat their flesh or touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. Leviticus 11 verses 7-8. This is not presented as a suggestion, but as a direct command tied to holiness and separation. Later, the prophets connect the eating of pigs' flesh with rebellion and defiance against God. A people who provoke me to my face continually, who eat the flesh of pigs, and whose pots hold broth of unclean meat, rabbit and hare, listed explicitly in Leviticus 11 as unclean because they appear to chew the cud but do not have split hooves. Biologically, they practice coprophagy, re-eating their own droppings to extract nutrients, which mimics rumination but lacks true detoxifying digestion. Squirrel, a rodent and omnivore that eats nuts, insects, eggs, carrion, and waste. Squirrels do not chew the cud or have split hooves and can carry parasites and diseases transmissible to humans. Mouse and rat, specifically named as unclean in Leviticus 11. These animals thrive in filth, consume waste and carrion, and are historically associated with the spread of disease. Their role is ecological cleanup, not nourishment. Dogs are omnivorous scavengers that will consume feces, carrion, refuse, and flesh. Biblically, dogs are consistently associated with uncleanness and scavenging behavior rather than food or sacrifice. Hippo, though herbivorous, hippos do not chew the cud and lack split hooves. Their digestive system is inefficient, and their semi-aquatic lifestyle exposes them to high bacterial loads. They do not fit the Torah's clean framework despite their plant-based diet. Cat, domestic and wild. All cats are obligate carnivores and predators. They consume blood, raw flesh, and small animals, placing them firmly outside the kosher category. Bear, eaten in some regions of the world, bears are omnivores that consume berries, insects, fish, carrion, and flesh. They do not meet kosher requirements and often carry parasites. Monkey and ape, consumed in parts of Africa and Asia, primates are omnivorous, scavenging, and biologically close to humans, which further distances them from being suitable food animals under biblical principles. Horses are non-kosher because they neither chew the cud nor have split hooves. They are hindgut fermenters, meaning food passes rapidly through their system with less detoxification. Elephants are non-kosher due to the absence of both required traits. Though herbivorous, they possess a very inefficient digestive system, processing massive quantities of vegetation with minimal breakdown. This results in high bacterial content and rapid fermentation. Kosher birds. Kosher birds are non-predatory, do not eat carrion or blood, and feed primarily on seeds, grains, or vegetation. While Scripture does not list them exhaustively, several are either explicitly approved or clearly accepted through use and sacrifice. The characteristics listed are classical identifying signs of kosher birds, preserved through long-standing tradition. While the Torah explicitly lists forbidden birds rather than permitted ones, Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14, later sages articulated observable traits that consistently appear in birds accepted as clean through an unbroken tradition, Mizorah. These laws are not merely Jewish rules, but part of the law of God, given for the ordering of life, purity, and distinction. While Israel was entrusted with preserving these instructions, their moral and creational principles reflect God's design for humanity and were known in some form even before Sinai. Genesis 7. Noah distinguishing clean and unclean animals. Kosher bird identifying characteristics. A bird traditionally recognized as kosher will have all of the following. It is not a bird of prey or scavenger. It does not hunt live animals. It does not eat carrion. This aligns with God's prohibition against consuming blood and death-associated animals. T possesses a crop, craw, used to store food before digestion. Common in grain and seed-eating birds, it has a gizzard with a peelable inner lining. The inner membrane can be easily separated by hand. This is one of the strongest physical indicators. It has an extra rear toe, hind toe slash etzba yetera. 3 toes forward, 1 clearly developed rear toe. Used for perching and balance, its eating behavior is non-violent. Kosher birds are not strictly vegetarian. Chickens, turkeys, and ducks will eat seeds and grains, plants, insects, and worms. What matters is that they do not hunt or tear flesh. Insect eating is permitted, and natural kosher birds are primarily grain and plant eaters and may consume insects, but they do not prey on other animals or scavenge carcasses. Kosher birds. Chicken, domestic fowl. Forager, not a bird of prey or scavenger. Has a crop craw. Possesses a gizzard with a peelable double lining. Foot structure: 3 front toes plus 1 hind toe, elongated middle toe. Perches with 3 toes forward, 1 back. Brings food down and breaks it with the beak. Turkey, same digestive anatomy as chicken. Ground forager, identical toe and perching structure. Accepted through post-biblical but widespread Jewish tradition. Duck, forager, not predatory. Crop present, thick, peelable gizzard lining. Same basic foot structure, webbed but still 3 forward plus hind toe. Non-scavenging behavior. Goose, grazing bird, eats grass and grains. Crop and gizzard with peelable lining. Not carnivorous or predatory. Traditional kosher bird in Europe and the Near East. Pigeon slash dove, explicitly permitted in the Torah. Crop and gizzard present. Ground feeding behavior. Toe structure consistent with kosher signs. Quail, specifically mentioned in Exodus 16 and Numbers 11. Ground forager. Digestive anatomy consistent with kosher birds. Partridge, non-predatory, ground-feeding bird. Same anatomical markers. Accepted in several Jewish communities. Pheasant, ground foragers. Similar anatomy to chicken. Accepted in some traditions, though not universal. Non-kosher birds, explicitly forbidden. Primary list: Leviticus 11 verses 13 to 19. Deuteronomy 14 verses 12 to 18. Eagle. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 13. Deuteronomy 14 verse 12. A bird of prey that hunts live animals and eats flesh and blood. Vulture. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 14. Deuteronomy 14 verse 13. A scavenger that feeds on carrion and decay. Buzzard slash kite. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 14. Deuteronomy 14 verse 13. Predatory and scavenging birds that consume flesh. Raven slash crow. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 15. Deuteronomy 14 verse 14. Omnivorous scavengers that eat carrion, waste, and refuse. Owl, all kinds. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verses 16 to 17. Deuteronomy 14 verses 15 to 16. Nocturnal predators that hunt rodents and birds. Hawk, all kinds. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 16. Deuteronomy 14 verse 15. Birds of prey that tear flesh. Falcon. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 16. Included in hawks of every kind. Seagull. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 16. Often translated as gull or seabird. A scavenger that feeds on fish remains, garbage, and carrion. Stork. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 19. Deuteronomy 14 verse 18. Despite being culturally admired, storks eat fish, frogs, reptiles, and carrion. Heron. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 19. A wading predator that consumes aquatic animals. Hoopoe. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 19. An insectivore that feeds in refuse and decaying matter. Bat. Biblical reference: Leviticus 11 verse 19. Though technically a mammal, bats are listed with birds due to flight. They consume insects and blood and are explicitly forbidden. Every bird explicitly named as unclean eats flesh, blood, insects, or carrion, hunts or scavenges, lies from death rather than growth. Every bird accepted as clean. Eats seeds, grain, or vegetation. Does not tear flesh. Does not feed on decay. The Torah's bird laws reinforce the same message seen with land animals. God separates nourishment from decay, life from death, and order from chaos. Birds that live by killing or scavenging are essential to ecosystems, but they are not suitable food for a people called to holiness. The distinction is not cultural. It is biblical, biological, and consistent. Fish and sea creatures. Unlike land animals and birds, the Torah gives explicit physical markers for aquatic life. These signs are simple, universal, and biologically consistent across all waters, rivers, lakes, and seas. Biblical requirement. Fish must have both fins and scales to be considered kosher. Leviticus 11 verses 9 to 12. Deuteronomy 14 verses 9 to 10. Any aquatic creature lacking one or both of these traits is forbidden. Why fins and scales matter. Biology. Fins indicate active, directional swimming and the ability to move through clean water layers rather than dwelling in sediment. Fish with fins are typically free-swimming and not dependent on the ocean floor for survival. Scales act as a natural protective barrier. They reduce direct exposure to parasites, bacteria, and environmental toxins, and they limit absorption of contaminants through the skin. Scaled fish also shed parasites more easily and are generally less prone to accumulating heavy metals. Together, fins and scales identify fish that live within clear ecological boundaries, feeding on smaller fish, plankton, or vegetation rather than consuming waste and decay. Common kosher fish with biblical basis. While Scripture does not list specific fish species, it provides universal criteria that allow identification across cultures and eras. Salmon. Biblical basis. Fins and easily removable scales. Leviticus 11 verse 9. Salmon are free-swimming fish with strong fins and protective scales. They feed on smaller fish and plankton, not on carrion or waste, making them biologically clean. Tuna. Biblical basis. Fins and scales. Scales are small but present. Tuna are fast-moving, open-water fish that do not dwell on the seafloor. Their active swimming and scaled skin align with kosher requirements. Cod. Biblical basis. Fins and scales. Cod are clean fish with a defined diet and a scale body, widely eaten and historically reliable as a food source. Sardine and herring. Biblical basis. Fins and scales. These small schooling fish feed on plankton and occupy a low, clean position in the food chain. Trout. Biblical basis. Fins and scales. Freshwater fish that live in clean, moving water and feed on insects rather than waste. What kosher fish avoid? Kosher fish do not feed on carrion or ocean waste, dwell permanently in sediment, absorb toxins directly through exposed skin, function as environmental cleanup agents. Their biology supports nourishment rather than decay. Non-kosher fish and shellfish, scavengers of the waters. Biblical standard. Any aquatic creature that does not have both fins and scales is unclean and forbidden for food. Leviticus 11 verses 10 to 12, Deuteronomy 14 verse 10. This rule applies universally to seas, rivers, lakes, and streams without exception. Why these creatures are not kosher. Biology. Aquatic animals lacking fins and scales generally occupy roles as bottom feeders, scavengers, filter feeders, or predators. Without scales, they lack a protective barrier, allowing toxins, heavy metals, and parasites to be absorbed directly through their skin. Many of these species also feed on decaying organic matter, dead animals, or waste suspended in the water. In aquatic ecosystems, these creatures function as cleanup agents, removing debris and decay. While essential to environmental balance, this role makes them biologically unsuitable as consistent human food, especially in the ancient world and even today under certain conditions. Shellfish and crustaceans, explicitly non-kosher. Shrimp and prawns. Shrimp are bottom-dwelling scavengers that feed on dead fish, decaying plants, and waste. They lack fins and scales and consume material other animals avoid, concentrating contaminants in their bodies. Lobster and crayfish. Lobsters and crayfish live on the sea or river floor and feed on carrion and organic debris. Their hard shells do not replace scales and offer no detoxifying protection. Crabs are opportunistic omnivores that eat dead animals, algae, and refuse. They lack fins and scales and thrive in polluted or stagnant environments. Oysters, clams, and mussels. These shellfish are filter feeders, drawing large volumes of water through their bodies and trapping plankton, bacteria, toxins, and heavy metals. Because they concentrate whatever is in the water, they pose elevated health risks. Crustaceans and cockroaches share the same fundamental biology because both belong to the arthropod group known as pancrustacea. They have chitin-based exoskeletons, segmented bodies, and jointed appendages, and both must molt to grow. Their nervous systems are similarly designed with a ventral nerve cord and segmental ganglia, and both use an open circulatory system with hemolymph instead of closed blood vessels. While cockroaches breathe through tracheal tubes and crustaceans use gills, the underlying respiratory function is the same, adapted only to land or water. Both groups rely on antennae and compound eyes for sensory input, processed through comparable neural pathways. Genetic evidence confirms insects evolved from crustacean-like ancestors, meaning insects are essentially terrestrial crustaceans. Despite living in different environments, they follow the same biological blueprint with only functional adaptations separating them. Non-kosher fish without fins and scales. Catfish. Catfish have fins, but no true scales, disqualifying them from kosher status. They are bottom feeders that consume decaying matter, dead fish, and waste. Eels. Eels lack scales and dwell in sediment, feeding on carrion and small animals. Their exposed skin readily absorbs contaminants. Sharks and rays. Though powerful swimmers, sharks and rays lack true scales and are apex predators that consume flesh, blood, and carrion. Their role as top predators leads to toxin accumulation. Lampreys and hagfish. Jawless fish that feed on dead or dying animals, often attaching to them. They lack both fins and scales. Cephalopods, always non-kosher. Octopus and squid. Cephalopods lack fins and scales and are active predators. They consume crustaceans and fish, processing flesh rapidly and absorbing contaminants through soft tissue. Unifying pattern of non-kosher aquatic life. Non-kosher fish and shellfish consistently. Lack fins, scales, or both. Feed on carrion, waste, or detritus. Absorb toxins directly through exposed skin. Accumulate heavy metals and parasites. Serve as environmental cleanup organisms. These traits mirror the same exclusion principles seen with scavenging land animals and predatory birds. The concern is not fear, superstition, or disgust, but discernment. God distinguishes between creatures designed for nourishment and those designed to remove decay. The Torah's sea life laws mirror its land and bird distinctions. Animals that thrive on decay are not meant for consumption. Fins and scales mark fish that live actively, feed selectively, and remain protected from environmental contamination. Non-kosher sea creatures are not condemned. They are assigned a different role. But for a people called to holiness, discernment, and life-centered order, God draws a clear boundary beneath the waters. Once again, the pattern holds. What feeds on death is excluded. What feeds on life is set apart. Insects. Insects are treated uniquely in the Torah. Unlike land animals and fish, nearly all insects are forbidden, with only a very narrow, clearly defined exception. Biblical foundation. Leviticus 11 verses 20 to 23. All flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet among them you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. Kosher insects, a rare and narrow exception. The Torah permits only certain types of locusts, and even then, only those that meet specific physical and behavioral traits. These insects were historically eaten during famines and in desert regions, not as daily food. Biblical requirements for kosher insects. A kosher insect must have 4 walking legs, have 2 additional jointed legs for hopping, be a plant eater, not a scavenger, belong to the locust/grasshopper family. Leviticus 11, verse 22 explicitly permits locust. Locusts are a type of migratory grasshopper that travel in swarms and consume vegetation. Scripture permits certain species because they have jointed legs above their feet for hopping, the defining kosher sign for insects. Historically, locusts were eaten across the ancient Near East as a common, protein-rich food. Bald locust. The bald locust refers to a specific locust species distinguished by a smooth or exposed head. Like other kosher locusts, it possesses the required jumping legs and wings. Jewish tradition, Mizorah, was essential for identifying which exact species were permitted. Grasshopper, certain species. Grasshoppers are plant-eating insects with strong hind legs designed for jumping. Only specific species were considered kosher, again based on clear physical traits and long-standing tradition. These insects were widely consumed in biblical times, often roasted or dried. Kosher insects are rarely eaten. Although permitted, insects were never a dietary norm in Israel. Their allowance reflects survival conditions rather than ideal nourishment. Insects lack the clean digestive system seen in ruminants or scaled fish and spoil rapidly without modern preservation. Non-kosher insects, the rule, not the exception. The vast majority of insects are non-kosher because they crawl in close contact with filth and decay, consume waste, carrion, feces, or blood, lack clean digestive separation, accumulate parasites and toxins rapidly. Leviticus 11 verses 41 to 44 states plainly that creeping things are detestable and not to be eaten. Commonly eaten insects worldwide, non-kosher. Despite modern trends promoting insects as sustainable protein, the Torah's logic remains biologically consistent. Mealworms, beetle larvae, fed on grain waste, mold, and decaying material, accumulate bacteria and parasites. Larval stage designed to break down decay, not provide nourishment. Crickets, non-locust species, often scavengers, consume waste, insects, and decaying matter. High microbial load when farmed at scale. Ants, consume dead insects, waste, and decomposing material. Formic acid content and contamination risk. Termites, feed on decaying wood and organic matter. Cultivated fungus inside their nests. Function biologically as decomposers. Spiders, predators that inject venom. Consume liquefied flesh and blood. Not insects technically, but clearly unclean. Beetles. Many species feed on dung, carrion, or rot. Known carriers of parasites and bacteria. Maggots, fly larvae, develop in rotting flesh and waste. Symbolize decay and corruption throughout Scripture. Extremely high contamination risk why insects are poor for human consumption. Biological overview. From a biological perspective, insects lack detoxifying digestive systems, absorb environmental toxins rapidly, carry parasites transferable to humans, spoil quickly and require heavy processing, often feed directly on decay, feces, or carrion. Even when farmed, insects retain these biological traits. Processing does not change what they are designed to consume or how they function. Insects are essential to ecosystems as decomposers, recyclers, and cleanup agents, but the Torah consistently separates ecological usefulness from dietary suitability. What lives in constant contact with decay is not meant to be food for a people called to holiness. The Torah's restriction on insects is one of its clearest statements of discernment. With only a narrow exception for specific plant-eating locusts, Scripture draws a firm boundary. Creatures that crawl through filth, feed on decay, or consume blood are not suitable nourishment. In an age rediscovering insect consumption, the ancient wisdom remains strikingly relevant, not reactionary, but rooted in biology, order, and reverence for life. Reptiles, creeping things, and similar creatures. The Torah is unambiguous regarding reptiles and land-based creeping creatures. They are not kosher. These animals are consistently associated with crawling close to the ground, decay, and contact with impurity rather than life-oriented nourishment. Biblical foundation: Leviticus 11 verses 29 to 31. Leviticus 11 verses 41 to 44. Every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be detestable. It shall not be eaten. Reptiles, why they are not kosher. Reptiles fail all kosher criteria. They do not chew the cud, do not have split hooves, and do not fit any permitted category of birds, fish, or insects. Common non-kosher reptiles: snakes, predators that consume whole animals, carrion, and eggs, associated biblically with curse and impurity. Lizards, explicitly listed as unclean, Leviticus 11 verse 30, feed on insects and decay. Geckos, named among unclean creeping things, thrive in filth-prone environments. Turtles and tortoises, though semi-aquatic, they lack fins and scales and feed on carrion and waste. Crocodiles and alligators, apex predators that consume flesh, blood, and decaying carcasses. Biological pattern: reptiles are cold-blooded scavengers or predators with slow, inefficient digestive systems. Many swallow prey whole, digesting flesh, bones, and parasites together. Their biology places them squarely in the category of animals that survive through death and decay, which the Torah consistently excludes. Snails, explicitly non-kosher. Snails fall under the category of creeping things, even though they're sometimes associated with water. Biblical basis: Leviticus 11 verses 41 to 42. Snails lack fins and scales, crawl on the ground or sediment, feed on decaying plant matter, algae, waste, and biofilm, absorb toxins directly through soft tissue. Because they are filtering and scavenging organisms, snails concentrate parasites and heavy metals. This is why they are frequently associated with parasitic disease in both ancient and modern contexts. Though eaten as a delicacy in some cultures, snails are biologically and biblically unsuitable for consumption. Amphibians, also non-kosher. Frogs, toads, salamanders. These animals live between water and land but qualify as creeping things. They consume insects, larvae, and decaying matter and absorb toxins directly through their skin. Biblical basis: Leviticus 11 verses 29 to 30. Creeping things. Unifying principle: reptiles, snails, amphibians, and similar creatures share common traits. They crawl in close contact with soil, sediment, or filth. They feed on insects, waste, carrion, or decay. They lack clean digestive separation. They absorb environmental toxins rapidly. They play essential ecological roles, but the Torah draws a clear boundary between ecosystem necessity and human nourishment. The Torah's exclusion of reptiles and creeping things reinforces one of its strongest dietary themes. What lives closest to decay is not meant to be eaten. Life-oriented nourishment is separated from creatures whose survival depends on scavenging, absorption, or predation. Even in edge cases like caviar, the rule remains consistent and precise. Clean comes from clean, unclean comes from unclean. The pattern never breaks, whether on land, in the air, or beneath the waters.